Well, 6 months after saying that he would not run for president, billionaire donor Tom Steyer is officially entering the 2020 race. The former hedge fund manager spent millions of dollars promoting the impeachment of President Trump since 2017. He's also donated large sums of money to Democratic candidates and environmental causes. According to the New York Times, Steyer is planning on spending $100 million of his own money on his campaign. Steyer is now the 25th Democrat currently in the primary field. Two candidates, California Congressman Eric Swalwell and former West Virginia State Senator Richard Ojeda, have already left the race. Here's how Steyer justified his candidacy in his campaign launch video.
What do we care about? We care about proving the world and handing it on to the next generation in a way so that they can lead better lives than we've had, in a way that's safer, more prosperous, and more beautiful and creative. And if we don't do those two things, then shame on us. If you think that there's something absolutely critical, try as hard as you can and let the chips fall where they may. And that's exactly what I'm doing. My name's Tom Steyer. I'm running for president.
And joining me now with more on the Steyer campaign and 2020 race is CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. So what happened? I thought the airplane doors were locked and they were already taxiing off the runway.
Right, exactly. I think the Democratic Party has this one in, one out policy where someone gets out and someone else can get in. So we're still locked at 25 candidates, I believe, with Tom Steyer getting in. But there is this big question about why now? Why get in this race now? He had said that he could do more on the outside, was running this big impeachment effort, running lots of ads, pledging to spend $100 million on that effort. Now it seems like he feels he can best get that message through by actually joining the field. And I guess there were reportedly some personal issues too going on that didn't allow him to run that first time around. But the big question is, does he have any kind of constituency at all?
Yeah.
You see a lot of these other candidates polling around 1%, not being able to gain much traction. We haven't really seen evidence yet that there's a real craving among Democrats for someone like Steyer to get into the race.
I mean, part of that is, you talk about constituency. Forbes says he's worth $1.6 billion. I mean, do potential or current Democratic voters want a billionaire against the landscape of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? It's
a great question, and Sanders and Warren have been trying to draw that contrast, and we've seen that through their fundraising, the way that they're raising money, focusing on grassroots donations. You heard Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders today say that people who are self-funding should not really be in this kind of race because they want to focus on the grassroots and on the people who are making these decisions. So there is this big question about whether there's any appetite among Democrats for someone like Steyer to be in this race. There's also huge hurdles for him because of the donor threshold to make the debates. He would have to raise money from grassroots donors. If you're already pledging to self-fund your entire campaign, that's not really an incentive for others to donate to it. So it would be very hard for him to get onto the debate stage and really then make a difference.
I want to talk fundraising in just a moment, but I want to ask you, though, as we mentioned in the introduction, Eric Swalwell has dropped out. Do you expect in the coming weeks that we'll have more people sort of dropping out this point?
Well, Eric Swalwell yesterday, in talking about him leaving the race, he said that basically, the money wasn't there, the support wasn't there, and they just really saw the writing on the wall. And he said he couldn't really mislead his staff or those who were supporting him at the time if there wasn't really a feasible path. And that's true. I mean, he was polling really low down in the polls. He made the debate stage, but it wasn't clear he would make it again with the requirements. So it does raise the question about some of these other candidates. John Hickenlooper, for example, who is also polling low down in the pack, only raised about $1 million this past quarter. We remember that Chuck Schumer had been trying to recruit a lot of these people to run for the Senate instead of the presidential. Hickenlooper said that the Senate isn't appealing to him, that he wants to keep making a go of it. But there is this big question, and we've been seeing this among voters. They're just overwhelmed by the number of candidates. They want the field to narrow sooner rather than later so they can focus on the general election eventually.
Speaking of numbers, fundraising numbers, we've seen some second quarter numbers. Elizabeth Warren getting a lot of attention for bringing in $19.1 million since April. But what I find surprising, she hasn't done major fundraising, right? So how has that affected sort of the race here?
That's right. She made a point early on in this campaign to say, look, I'm rejecting big dollar fundraisers. I'm not going to do them. I'm focusing solely on raising grassroots money. And there was a big question about whether that would pay off. And now it appears that it is. And we've seen her consistent rise in the polls match really that number of fundraisers. And what the point she's trying to make is, look, we can do this. The Democrats can raise money without relying on big donors, without relying on these backdoor fundraisers. So she's been trying to make a point of doing that. Now, she does have a huge staff. She's invested a lot on ground efforts. So there is this question about how much money she's spending, how quickly. But these kinds of numbers help her to sustain that large campaign. And it also raises questions about a couple other candidates and where they are lining up. So Pete Buttigieg, as we've talked about, raised $25 million. He's so far the leader of the pack. But so far on the ground and in polling, we're just not really seeing that resonate yet. So there's a big question about can he match up. Kamala Harris, we've been seeing a lot of talk among voters supporting her, seeing her rise in the polls, but she raised about $12 million.
Why do you think that is?
So there is this question about now that she kind of got that momentum heading out of that debate, whether she can keep up with fundraising to match it. I think that's the big question for a lot of these candidates.
And in all fairness, there hasn't been a whole lot of time since that last debate and the next one that's to come. I want to ask you about, we're kind of fascinated by the former fighter pilot Amy McGrath, who announced that she's going to run against Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. You know, I was reading the Louisville papers and it was kind of fascinating to sort of see how they're taking it. She's got this Ditch Mitch campaign. Does she really have a chance?
It is going to be such an uphill climb in a state like Kentucky. Now, McGrath ran for Congress in 2018 in a district that was still Republican but had some demographics and changes that favored Democrats. And 2018 was an extremely good year for Democrats. So there's this thought that if she couldn't win in a congressional race in a really good year for Democrats, can she defeat Mitch McConnell, who has long, deep ties to the state, is obviously the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, and in a state that Democrats are not going to try to really flip or don't believe they could really flip. So with Trump on the top of the ticket, does that make it even more difficult for a Democrat to win statewide there? But could force McConnell to shift some resources and focus in on that state. And also, it's a response to what Democrats were asked during that debate. How would you take on Mitch McConnell in the Senate? And a couple of them said, well, first, it starts with defeating him. So this is what they consider their first step. Still a big uphill climb for Democrats.
A big uphill climb, right? And I heard there's a radio host and possibly the mayor of Louisville who might also throw their hat in the ring. But you think this is really a difficult
It's a very difficult state, but Democrats want to at least have some competition there. Again, to force McConnell to really focus on his own reelection campaign. He is a real, considered the top strategist for Senate candidates across the country. So this is a way for Democrats to kind of put him on notice at the very least, but still a difficult state for them.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much for joining us, Caitlin.